It was the sound of the tires that did it, not the soft creak of my knees as I stood up too quickly, not the quiet shuffle of clothes being folded in the next room, not even the strange absence of my son's voice that morning he'd already left, or maybe he'd never come home. But the tires, the way the gravel cracked under the weight of a black town car pulling into the driveway, that was when I knew. I pressed my hand to the window pane like a child. The sun hadn't fully risen yet, and a long beam of light split through the bare trees, hitting the windshield and bouncing off the man's sunglasses. He didn't get out. He just sat there, engine running, the exhaust curling like breath into the cold November air. My bags were already packed. Someone not me had done that. There was a note, not even a full page. Just a folded square of printer paper left on the hallway table under my medication. It read, "The center will take good care of you. You'll have everything you need. This is temporary," signed Michael, my son. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stood there looking at the note, rereading the word temporary, as if saying it out loud might summon someone back into the house to explain, to apologize, to look me in the eyes like a person. But no one came. I walked down the hall slowly because the left side of my body still didn't trust me after the stroke. The car was still idling outside. The driver got out when he saw me open the door. He was young, polite, wearing one of those stiff black coats with the collar popped. He reached for my suitcase before I could stop him. "Ma'am?" he asked, soft-voiced, as if I might crumble. I nodded and let him take it. He didn't know, of course. He wasn't the enemy. Just a driver, paid by someone with a credit card and no spine. The house was quiet behind me. Too quiet. There was a bowl of fruit on the counter, plastic wrap pulled tight over it like they were expecting me to come back. But the fridge had already been emptied of my low-sodium meals. My slippers were missing. My bedroom light was turned off, the door closed like a guest room that no longer needed to be used. The car ride was just under an hour. He didn't speak much, though I saw him glance at me in the mirror a few times, probably wondering why an old woman with a cashmere wrap and quiet eyes looked like she was going to her own funeral. We pulled into a place called Rosefield Renewal. Not a hospital, not even a nursing home. It looked like a boutique hotel, manicured hedges, those little stone fountains that serve no real purpose except to disguise silence. The building was long made of brick and glass with white trim. A woman came out to greet me, clipboard in hand. "Eleanor." "Yes, welcome. We're so happy to have you with us." I wanted to ask, did I agree to be here? Did I sign something? Do you even know who I am? But all I said was, "Is this temporary?" She smiled too widely. "Oh, that depends entirely on your family's wishes." That was the first blow. Not the worst, not the deepest, but the first. It cracked something small inside me, like a hairline fracture in a tooth that you don't notice until you bite down the wrong way. My room was clean quiet. There was a single bed, a wide window overlooking a garden that had already shed its flowers for winter. A framed print of some meadow in Vermont hung above the dresser. They'd unpacked my bag for me before I arrived. There was no photograph of Michael, not of his wedding, not of my granddaughter, not even a note saying, "We'll visit soon." For 3 weeks, I sat in that room while women with soft shoes and medical smiles gave me lavender tea and complimented my resilience. I was allowed to walk the grounds. There was yoga, art therapy, tai chi. But no phone calls, no visits. Every day I asked the receptionist if I had any messages, Not today, Ms. Thompson, she'd say like clockwork. And every night, I replayed the last real Thanksgiving we had together 5 years ago, before his wife decided I was too much stress to have around the baby. Before Michael started calling me Mom in that clipped, embarrassed tone like the word tasted sour, I'd made cornbread stuffing from scratch, the good kind with sage and sausage. Michael had eaten 2 helpings. His wife complimented it, but her eyes never looked up from her phone. That was before the stroke, before my handwriting trembled and my left foot dragged, before I became something to be managed. I stayed silent those first few weeks. I ate my meals. I folded my clothes. I smiled when I was supposed to. But inside, a new kind of weather was forming. Not grief. Not quite. Something colder. Something that didn't need their permission to survive. The 3rd Friday and someone finally visited. Not Michael. A courier. He dropped off an envelope addressed to me in handwriting I didn't recognize. No return address. Inside was a typed message unsigned. Please stop asking about visits. You are being well cared for. Let us handle things from here. That's when the silence inside me stopped being a place of waiting. It became a place of watching. Because whatever this was, whatever they were doing, it wasn't about my health. It wasn't about care. It was about forgetting, about making me vanish before I noticed something. I didn't know what yet, but I would. I was 19 when my father called me his pride. I can still hear the way his voice caught just slightly the day I got the acceptance letter to Columbia. Full ride. Pre-law. He framed the envelope like it was a piece of art, hung it right next to the old photograph of him and Mama from their wedding day. He said, "Ellie, you're gonna change everything for this family." I believed him. I believed a lot of things back then. I believed hard work meant something. That love stayed. That showing up fully, faithfully earned you a place in someone's heart that couldn't be auctioned off when it got inconvenient. Michael was just a bump in the road at first. I was 22, 1 semester away from my JD interview when I found out I was pregnant. His father, Daniel, was the kind of man who smiled too much in public and said nothing behind closed doors. We got married in a courthouse. My mother refused to attend. She said, "You've already thrown your future away. Don't ask me to clap while you do it." I left law school before I even saw my locker. We moved into Daniel's mother's basement for a while. I got a job typing invoices for a roofing company while he floated between sales gigs and self-employment opportunities that never lasted more than a season. Michael was born on a wet spring morning, April 3rd. He had a full head of dark hair and lungs that filled the whole room. I remember thinking, maybe it's okay. Maybe this is enough. I poured myself into motherhood like it was a second chance. I learned to bake birthday cakes from scratch. I made his Halloween costumes by hand. I kept the house spotless even when we had to rent. When Daniel finally walked out after 13 years of silence affairs and never quite making rent on time, I didn't chase him. I just got quieter. Michael was the only one who made the silence bearable. When he turned 17, I found him on the porch late at night, tears in his eyes over a rejection letter from Princeton. I told him, "You're more than a piece of paper. You're mine." That's enough. He didn't say much, just rested his head against my shoulder. He went to community college. Met Claire during sophomore year. She was bright, clever, composed with that cold elegance some women wear like perfume. She always smiled just a second too late and looked away just a second too soon. When they got married, I bought them a house. Not in full, but the down payment came from the small inheritance my father left me. The house was 2 blocks from the elementary school and had a lemon tree in the backyard. I remember Michael holding the keys stunned. He said, "Why would you give us this?" And I said, "Because it's what family does." I didn't understand then that to him that kind of love came with a price tag, a scorecard, something to feel embarrassed about, something to repay or erase. Claire never said it outright, but she found small ways to let me know I'd overstayed my welcome. She'd rewash dishes I'd cleaned, rearrange the guest room without asking. "Oh, I just want it to feel a little fresher," she'd say, as if I left behind a scent she couldn't scrub out. When they had Madison, they offered me the chance to move in temporarily, they said, to help, to be close. I thought it was a gesture of love. It was a leash. Within a year, I was doing the school drop-offs, the laundry, the grocery runs, the waiting in pediatric offices. I didn't mind. Madison adored me. Her tiny hands reached for mine in the morning like they belonged there. But every time I tried to say thank you to show them I appreciated the roof over my head, Claire would cut in with, "Of course. You've done so much. We're just doing our part now." Their part started getting smaller. They started going on trips without me. Long weekends, dinners out. Then longer business trips 1 week, then 2. And always the same explanation. "You're so good with Madison. She barely notices we're gone." I started to feel less like a mother and more like furniture. Still, I kept quiet. I told myself, this is what love looks like at this age. Support, sacrifice, service, until the stroke. It happened one morning in February. I was standing in the kitchen folding Madison's lunch napkin when I dropped the knife I was holding and couldn't move my hand to pick it up. The numbness spread like a fog down my arm into my chest. I sat down on the cold tile floor and waited for someone to notice. Michael was out of town. Claire came home late and found me on the floor, dazed, confused, a puddle of applesauce near my hip where I'd dropped the lunch tray. She called 911. At the hospital, they said it was mild. No paralysis, just fatigue. Some minor loss of coordination on the left side. I was discharged 3 days later, given physical therapy exercises, a new prescription, and a recommendation for supportive aftercare. Michael never visited me in the hospital. Claire showed up on the second day, brought me a pair of slip-resistant socks and a copy of Good Housekeeping. She said, "Don't worry, we'll make sure you're taken care of." I thought she meant at home, but when I was released, they didn't take me home. They took me to Rosefield. Not even them. A driver. Just the driver. That night in that quiet retreat room, I remembered how many things I'd given up. The law degree, the city life, the chance to be my own woman. All so I could belong to someone. And now, I didn't belong anywhere. I was a burden wrapped in politeness, tucked away neatly, managed. That was the night I stopped asking when they'd visit and started asking what they were hiding. The invitation came in a pale blue envelope, like something sent out for a wedding or a baby shower. It was addressed to me in Michael's handwriting, still slightly crooked, like it always had been since childhood, but colder now, more formal. It read, "We'd love to have you home for Thanksgiving. Madison misses you. 1 night only, of course. Let us know if you need a driver." I stared at it for a long time, unsure if the ink itself felt accusatory or if it was just me growing sensitive from the weeks of isolation. 1 night only. Like I was a borrowed coat they weren't sure would match the new furniture. Still, I said yes. Maybe it was the way they said Madison missed me. Maybe I needed to see her face to remember that something I'd poured into this family still mattered. Or maybe it was something darker, heavier, that aching, bitter root called hope that never fully dies no matter how many times it's burned. Rosefield arranged the transportation. No driver this time, just a small beige shuttle van shared with 2 other women being dropped off for the holidays. One of them had no teeth. The other clutched a music box to her chest, the whole ride muttering the words to an old gospel hymn. We were treated like cargo, gently handled, politely ignored. When the van pulled up to Michael's house, Claire was already at the door. Arms folded, smile thin. "Oh, good," she said, as if I'd shown up without warning. "Right on time." The air smelled like rosemary and cinnamon. The house had been redecorated again. The photo wall in the hallway no longer had any pictures of me. Where my wedding photo with Daniel once stood there was now a framed quote that read, "Family is who shows up." I kept my coat on longer than I needed to. Madison ran to me. She was taller, now 12, with braces and one earring already missing. "Grandma," she squealed, burying her face into my chest. Her arms were still small enough to wrap around me completely. That alone almost made the visit worth it. Almost. Dinner was a polished production. Claire had labeled place settings. Tiny ceramic pumpkins lined the table runner. The turkey had been carved ahead of a time, clean, symmetrical slices laid out like exhibit pieces. The mashed potatoes were piped into perfect swirls. Everything looked like a magazine ad. But no one spoke to me. Not really. Claire asked if I needed a softer chair. Michael offered to cut my turkey for me as if I'd regressed into childhood. Madison tried to pull me into conversation, but every time she asked me a question, Claire would redirect. "Grandma, do you remember when you used to braid my hair in the kitchen, Claire? Honey, let's not make her tired with too many questions. Grandma, didn't you say you studied law?" "Michael, we're not doing career stories today. Grandma, do you still have your jewelry box?" "Claire, we donated most of that. Remember?" There it was. That final sentence, said too casually over a sip of white wine, landed like a blow. "We donated most of that." Most of what? What else had they taken while I was gone? I excused myself and went to the guest bathroom, the same room I'd once stayed in during weekends back when I was still invited to stay. The door creaked slightly now. The wallpaper had changed. A framed painting of the lemons hung above the towel rack, probably to match the lemon tree out back. On the sink was a small ceramic dish of guest soaps. Underneath it, tucked partially behind a stack of folded towels, was a used envelope with my name written in Claire's handwriting. I pulled it out. Inside was a packing checklist. My belongings. Room by room. Marked donate in blue ink. Vintage jewelry. No appraised value. Box of old photos. Books, law, old fiction, personal diaries. A note at the bottom read, "Mother-in-law has no current legal power or income. Safe to discard." My hands began to tremble. I folded the note back up and placed it back exactly where I'd found it. When I returned to the table, my dinner plate had gone cold. Everyone was laughing about something Madison had made a joke I didn't hear. Claire turned and looked at me with a practiced smile. "Everything okay, Eleanor?" I nodded. I sat down. I ate the turkey. Quietly. Slowly. My fork scraped the plate and no one noticed. After dinner, Claire suggested a game of charades. Michael poured brandy. No one asked if I wanted any. I sat by the window and watched the lemon tree sway in the breeze, its yellow fruit glowing under the porch light. Then Madison sat beside me. "Are you staying, Grandma?" she asked. Her voice was too loud, too honest. Claire stiffened. Michael cleared his throat. I looked at Madison. Really looked at her. That open, beautiful child who still thought asking a question meant you'd get an answer. "No, baby," I said. "Just visiting." She frowned. "But this is your house too, right? You paid for it." Silence. Thick. Heavy. Too heavy for a child to notice. Claire smiled, but her fingers gripped her wine glass too tightly. Michael turned away and pretended to refill his. I didn't answer. I couldn't, because somewhere between that lemon tree and that cold plate of food, I realized the house I bought had become a mausoleum, not for a body, but for a woman I used to be. I slept in the guest room that night. No one said goodnight. In the morning, the shuttle arrived promptly at 8 a.m. I carried my own bag to the curb. Claire waved from the porch robe, tied tight, coffee in hand. "Thanks for coming," she said. "Not come back soon. Not we missed you. Just thanks the kind you offer a server at a restaurant you don't plan to return to." As the van pulled away, I looked back at the house one last time and saw the blinds in the office shift slightly. Someone was watching. The box wasn't hidden. That's what haunted me later. It wasn't locked away in a vault or buried beneath floorboards. It was just dusty, forgotten, like the truth had been waiting patiently right out in the open for me to stop believing the lie. It started the week after Thanksgiving, when a new staff member at Rosefield, a soft-spoken young man named Joshua, asked if I wanted to go through the personal effects stored in my overflow storage unit. I hadn't known I had one. Apparently, when Claire admitted me, she'd labeled several boxes as non-essential keepsakes and requested they be stored off-site in what the facility politely referred to as a memory annex. "I figured you might want to review it for closure," Joshua said, wheeling in a small cart with 3 battered file boxes and one weathered suitcase with my initials pressed into the leather. The smell hit me first. Paper cedar. Something faintly sweet lavender, maybe from an old sachet tucked between folded scarves. My scarves. My letters. My handwriting on yellowing envelopes. I sat on the floor in my room, legs tucked under me, and began unpacking 20 years of quiet erasure. There were photo albums Michael hadn't asked about. A locket with my mother's hair still braided inside. The first birthday card Madison ever drew for me in crayon, the letters backward and beautiful. My marriage license. My divorce decree. The deed to my first home. And then wedged between 2 oversized law books my father had given me, Black's Law Dictionary and Cases in Civil Torts. I saw the corner of something official-looking. Manila envelope, cracked at the seams, addressed in my father's firm, upright hand. I pulled it free. On the front. To be opened by Eleanor Thompson only. Private estate transfer documentation enclosed. I stared at it for a long time. My hands had started trembling again, not from the stroke, but from memory. That handwriting. That firm looping signature. My father had died 8 years ago. I'd sat beside his bed while the morphine ran out the clock. He'd whispered my name last. Not Michael's. Mine. Inside the envelope was a copy of his will, not the same one the family had discussed after the funeral. This one was dated 6 years prior, long before Michael and Claire had moved him into assisted living. Long before the updated version conveniently split everything 3 ways, 1/3 to Michael, 1/3 to his sister in Florida, and 1/3 to a vague medical research foundation. This will was different. Everything was left to me, not just the house. Not just the savings account I thought had been drained. Everything. It was notarized, witnessed, filed correctly, and it had never been presented. Taped to the last page was a note handwritten, scrawled quickly as if my father had added it without telling his attorney, Ellie. I trust only you. If something happens, check with Richard. He has a copy too. Do not let Michael or Claire manage this. You'll understand why. Richard. His old lawyer. Retired now. Last I'd heard, he was living upstate. My heart was beating so loudly I could feel it in my ears. I looked around the room's sterile beige suffocating and felt the walls lean in. What had they done? What had Claire known? What had Michael allowed? The next morning, I asked the front desk to place a call to Richard Haynes. It took 4 tries. He was hard of hearing. His wife answered the first few times. On the 4th, he picked up. Ellie, he said. Good Lord. I thought you were dead. I laughed. Or tried to. It came out as a wet, cracked thing. No, I said. Just misplaced. He still had the file. He still had the voice of someone who had been waiting for this call for a long time. They never contacted me, he said. Not after the funeral. I reached out once. No response. I assumed they'd used the copy they drew up from the assisted facility. I wasn't notified of probate. My hand tightened around the phone. They didn't tell me there was a probate hearing, I said. He was quiet for a long moment. Then carefully, they may have filed an alternate version. I never withdrew the original. It's still valid. I asked him what that meant. It means he said you may still legally own everything, including the house you bought, the accounts, the land. The air in my room changed. I could feel it, like someone had opened a window I hadn't realized was painted shut. But it's been 8 years, I whispered. It doesn't matter, he said. Fraud is fraud. If they withheld this intentionally, it's actionable. I thanked him, asked him to send me a certified copy. He said he would. It arrived 2 weeks later in a thick envelope I opened with trembling fingers. As I turned the pages, my mind wandered back through the last decade, the slow push into invisibility. The way Claire smiled when she handed me tea, the way Michael never made eye contact anymore, the way I had thanked them for allowing me to be part of my own grandchild's life. I should have screamed. I should have wept. But what I felt wasn't rage. It was something far more dangerous. Clarity, cold, clean, absolute. They hadn't just forgotten me. They had removed me, erased me from the ledger like I'd never paid the down payment, never changed the diapers, never sat through the court hearings when Michael was 19 and scared and stupid. I had been airbrushed out of my own life. But now I had the pen again, and I was going to write myself back in. I wore navy, not black that would have felt too dramatic, not beige they might have thought I was still trying to fade. Navy, clean, tailored. The coat buttoned just right over my hips, the scarf a deep plum wound once around my throat. The kind of outfit my mother used to call dignified armor. The air outside was brittle and cold, the kind that snaps against your cheeks and reminds you what breathing used to feel like. The wind carried the sharp scent of chimney smoke and damp leaves as I walked up the curved stone path toward the house. My house. I'd bought it with my father's inheritance, paid the taxes, chosen the lemon tree sapling in the backyard. I had watched Madison take her first steps on the porch while Michael filmed with shaking hands. And yet, for 20 years, I had let them make me feel like a guest. Not tonight. The porch light was on, casting a soft gold halo on the doormat, a new one. It read, "Grateful, blessed, gathered." I almost laughed. Through the frosted glass of the front door, I saw shadows' movement silhouettes, the soft clatter of silverware, the warm, polite hum of conversation. I waited for a beat, then knocked. 3 slow, deliberate taps. Claire answered. She froze smile halfway to formed her eyes, landing first on my coat, then on the leather folder in my hand, then briefly on my face. "Eleanor," she said like a question and a warning wrapped together. "You didn't say you were coming." I looked over her shoulder. The table was full. 8 place settings. The good plates. The table runner embroidered in copper thread. Candles flickering. Claire's parents were there. So was Michael's sister and her teenage twins. Madison was seated at the far end, carving shapes into her napkin with the dull edge of a butter knife. When she looked up and saw me, her face lit up. Her mouth formed the word grandma, but it was silent behind the glass. "I wasn't invited," I said calmly, "but I own the house, so I thought I'd drop in." Claire's face didn't move for a long time. Then carefully she opened the door and stepped aside. "You're making a scene." "No," I said. "I'm making a correction." Michael stood as I entered. He looked older, heavier. The boy who once sobbed over a Princeton rejection had become a man who couldn't look his own mother in the eyes. He said my name like it tasted wrong. "Mom." I nodded. "Michael." I walked past him and placed the leather folder on the sideboard next to the stack of extra napkins and unopened wine bottles. I didn't open it. Not yet. Instead, I turned to the room. The silence was deep and wide. Claire cleared her throat. "We weren't expecting you. This is a family dinner." I looked around. Then I'm exactly where I should be. No one spoke. Not even Madison. I let the stillness stretch long and sharp. I wanted them to feel it, the weight of everything they had refused to acknowledge. Not just the estate. Not just the will. But the years. The birthdays spent in silence. The Mother's Days with unsigned cards. The way they talked around me like I was a structural support beam necessary but unworthy of attention. I found the will I said finally. My voice didn't shake. Michael blinked. What will I turn to face him fully? For a moment I saw the child in him, the boy who used to build Lego towers on the living room floor, who once held my hand during thunderstorms. And then I remembered how easily he'd let me go. "The real one," I said. "The one your grandfather wrote. The one you never filed." Claire stepped forward. "That's ridiculous. He updated everything before he died. We were advised. You were advised nothing." I interrupted. "You never even told me when probate was filed. You never contacted his attorney. You never asked what was right, only what was easy." Her mouth opened then shut. Her eyes darted to Michael, who now looked like a man standing on a trap door. "I have the certified copy," I said. "I spoke with his lawyer. You'll be receiving notice from mine next week." "Eleanor, this doesn't have to be ugly," Michael said. His voice had dropped the way it used to when he was about to lie. "We can talk about this. Find a compromise." I turned to him. "My son. The one I raised. The one I protected. The one who forgot the sound of my laugh and replaced it with appointments and evasions. You sent me away in a car without saying goodbye," I said. "You handed over my belongings to strangers. You erased me from my granddaughter's home and thought I'd go quietly." He started to speak. I held up a hand. "I am not here for apologies. I am not here for reconciliation. I am not even here for justice. I stepped closer to the table, pulled out the chair at the head, and sat. I am here to reclaim what was mine all along. The room was frozen. Claire's mother coughed awkwardly. Madison stared at me with wide eyes. Claire whispered, "This is not the time." I looked up at the chandelier, then at my watch. "It's exactly the time." Then softly I pulled out a single sheet of paper from the folder. It was a notice of ownership transfer request. My lawyer had prepared it as a courtesy gesture, a chance for them to surrender the property quietly before litigation. I slid it across the table toward Michael. He didn't touch it. "Madison," I said, turning toward her, "would you help me out back for a moment? I want to check on the lemon tree." Claire started to object. I didn't wait. Madison followed me coatless barefoot on the flagstone. The lemon tree stood crooked and bare. Winter had taken the last of its fruit, but it was still rooted. So was I. Madison looked up at me. "Are you mad at them?" "No," I said. "I'm awake now." "That's different." She nodded like she understood. Inside through the glass, I watched Claire lean over Michael, whispering furiously. His hands were clenched on the table. No one touched the food. I smiled, not cruelly, not triumphantly, just quietly. Because after all the silence, all the erasure, all the careful minimization, I was finally seen. Not as a guest, not as a burden, but as the woman who still owned the land they sat on, and this time I wasn't going anywhere. The paperwork took 4 months. 4 long months of carefully worded letters, veiled threats, and attorneys whispering through phones like priests in confessional booths. Michael didn't contest it, not officially. Claire tried to delay, of course. Hired a lawyer with a sharp haircut and soft threats. But the will was airtight, the signatures too precise, the dates too damning. There was no war, just a slow unraveling of their grip. In the end, they didn't fight for the house. They fought for their pride. That was the part hardest for them to surrender, not the bricks or the lemon tree or the title deed. It was the story they'd crafted, the one where I was a burden they had graciously carried. They left in June. No note. No goodbye. Just empty closets and a voicemail from Claire's attorney listing the date of vacancy. The house was quiet again. For a few days, I kept expecting someone to knock on the door, Madison maybe, or even Michael, but no one came. That part hurt more than I expected. I didn't cry, not really. Just sat in the kitchen some mornings, letting the coffee grow cold in my hands, listening to the silence as if it might deliver one more truth I'd missed. Then one day, I stepped out into the backyard barefoot. The stone path was warm under my feet. The air smelled of sun and cut grass. The lemon tree had died. Maybe it had been sick for a while. Maybe no one had cared for it. Or maybe it just knew its season was done. The branches were brittle, the leaves curled in on themselves like clenched fists. A single fruit still hung shriveled and half-rotten from the highest branch. I stood beneath it for a long time. Then I dug. Not to bury it, but to start again. I cleared a small patch of earth. My knees ached. My fingers cramped. I took my time. I didn't rush. I pressed bulbs into the soil, tulips, hyacinth, a few daffodils, knowing they wouldn't bloom for months. Knowing they'd require care, I hadn't offered anything in years. And then I planted rosemary. Not for remembrance, I didn't want to remember them. I planted it for strength. Each morning I went outside and watered it with a blue tin can that used to sit forgotten on the back porch. I wiped the sweat from my forehead. I sat in the shade. I let the sun find me slowly, like it wasn't sure I still belonged. Inside the house, I moved through rooms I used to tiptoe through like a guest. I chose new paint colors, sage, rust, soft linen. I donated the dinnerware Claire picked out for appearances. I burned the dried eucalyptus she left in the vases. I threw out the bath mats. I kept only what was mine. On the third Sunday of July, I heard a soft knock at the door. Madison. She was holding a paper bag and wearing that same sideways smile her grandfather used to wear when he got caught sneaking a beer. I brought you lemon bars, she said. They're from a mix, but I added extra zest. I opened the door wide. She stepped in like she'd never left. We sat on the porch and ate the bars with our fingers. She talked about school, about her new friends, about how Claire now only mentioned me in vague sideways comments like she had her reasons or it was complicated. Madison said, I don't think it was complicated. I think they were just wrong. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. She looked out at the freshly turned soil. Are those going to bloom? Eventually, I said. Not yet. She nodded, understanding something I didn't say. When she left, she kissed my cheek and said I'll come by again. Not because I have to. That night I stood in the kitchen alone. I ran my fingers along the counter. I whispered thank you. To the silence. To the soil. To the version of myself that didn't go quietly into the soft place they'd tried to tuck me. I was not a mother reclaimed. I was a woman remembered by herself. No banners, no family reunion, just breath, just space, just a garden beginning. I found the photo in a drawer I hadn't opened in years. One of those shallow ones at the bottom of the hutch in the living room where old napkin rings and place card holders gathered dust alongside bent paper clips and dried up pens. It was a picture of me, Michael, and Daniel, taken on Thanksgiving decades ago. My hair still dark Daniel holding a carving knife mid-slice Michael around 8 years old, arms slung loosely over my shoulders. I remembered that sweater cream cable knit too hot for the kitchen, but I'd worn it anyway because Daniel always said it made me look respectable. Looking at it now, it felt like someone else's life. A woman smiling into the lens while her future hollowed itself out behind her. I lit the fireplace of that afternoon, even though the sun still hung high and the temperature didn't ask for warmth. The hearth crackled to life, wood snapping like bones. I held the photo in both hands just long enough to feel the weight of everything it had taken from me. Then I fed it to the flames. Not out of anger, not revenge, just release. The edges curled quickly. My younger face disappeared first, then Michael's. Daniel's eyes vanished last, the only part of him that had ever really seen me clearly, and even that had only lasted a season. Ash floated up like snow, and I felt lighter. A few days later, I cleaned the guest room, not because I expected company, but because I finally saw it for what it was, the last shrine to my invisibility. Claire's throw pillows were still there, lined up like soldiers, the matching set of pale blue towels, the neutral art print of a sailboat that I'd never liked but never replaced. I stripped the bed, threw out the pillows, took the towels to a donation bin near the farmer's market, left the room empty for now. Let it breathe. That's how I lived for a while. Quietly, one drawer at a time, one object at a time. Reclaiming space, not through noise, but through subtraction. Sometimes Madison visited. Sometimes she didn't. She never brought Michael. Once she told me he'd asked if I'd forgiven him. I asked her what she said. She shrugged. I told him I didn't think that was your job anymore. I didn't respond, but I smiled. She was right. Forgiveness implies restoration, a return. I didn't want that, not anymore. I didn't want the old roles back, the doting mother, the helpful grandmother, the afterthought at the table. What I wanted, what I had, was something far quieter. Control. I began to move through my days without flinching. I ate dinner when I pleased. Sometimes I sat in the backyard past midnight wrapped in a blanket staring at the stars like they might give me instructions. They never did, but they stayed. Unlike people. One morning, I found a manila envelope slid halfway under my front door. No postage. No return address. Inside, a single photo. Me and Madison taken from a distance. From the street, maybe. The angle was low, almost thoughtful. We were sitting on the porch steps. She was laughing, her head thrown back. I was holding a mug. Someone had watched us. I sat with that for a long time. At first I felt cold, the old chill of intrusion of being studied without permission. But then I looked again. There was something almost reverent in the photo. A tenderness. Not malice. Still, I burned it. Not because it scared me, but because it didn't belong to me. Not really. Whoever had taken it, Michael perhaps, or Claire, would have to find their own ways to grieve what they'd lost. I wasn't offering closure. I wasn't interested in reconciliation. That door had closed the moment they opened a different one and sent me through it like excess luggage. What surprised me, though, was how little I thought about them now. Their names stopped ringing in my head like broken bells. Their decisions no longer lived under my skin. Even their absence felt expected, like a tooth I'd already learned to live without. I started writing again, not anything grand, just pages in a small spiral-bound notebook. Notebooks Claire once called dust collectors when I tried to keep journals years ago. I wrote about the garden, about the way the rosemary was thriving, about the tiny green shoot pushing up where I'd planted the hyacinths, about the sun warming the porch boards, about my hands still trembling some mornings but steady enough to hold a pen. I didn't write about Michael, not directly, not about the betrayal or the years or the things he didn't say when he had the chance, but sometimes the shape of the silence between sentences looked like him. And I let it be. I was pulling down old curtains when I found it. The rods had rusted slightly, and I'd decided on a quiet Tuesday afternoon that I wanted softer light in the dining room. Something that let the sun fall gently, not the thick beige fabric Claire had insisted was timeless. I tugged one end a little too hard, and the bracket came loose. A chunk of drywall crumbled at the corner, revealing a sliver of something folded behind the baseboard. I didn't think much of it at first. Assumed it was a receipt or some old installation note. But when I pulled it out, it was a letter. Folded twice, edges brittle. The ink faded in parts, written in Michael's handwriting. Not recent. Teenage, maybe early 20s before he learned to press harder to form his letters with authority. It was addressed to Claire. No envelope. No date. Just this. Claire, I know you're trying. I know you think I don't see it the way you wash the dishes again after my mom does them, the way you change small things when she's not looking. I don't know if it's because she makes you feel judged or because she's too much in a way that makes you feel not enough. But she gave up everything for me. Everything. If we push her out, it has to be clean, gentle, kind. no resentment. I don't want her to hate me, but I also don't want to live under the weight of what I owe her. You said something last night about how love can feel like debt. I think you're right, but I still owe her, and if you ever make me forget that, I hope she finds a way to remind me. I sat down in the dining room chair with the letter still open in my lap. I read it 5 times, maybe 6, and something strange happened. I didn't feel rage. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt nothing. Not numb, not cold. Just a kind of quiet beyond sadness. The kind that comes when you realize the tragedy already happened long ago, and this is just the leftover noise from a building that fell without anyone watching. He had known. He had known. He just didn't stop it. There was a kind of grief in that, a grief so still it didn't move. I folded the letter again neatly this time and slid it into the top drawer of the old writing desk in the corner. Not to keep it, not as evidence, just so it wouldn't go back into the walls. That weekend, I went to a garage sale. I bought a rocking chair, faded cherry wood creaking slightly but still strong. I put it on the back porch near the lemon tree's stump. From there, I could see the whole garden. The rosemary had doubled in size. The tulips had begun to peek up soft green tongues pushing through the dirt. On Sunday, I made coffee and sat outside as the sun rose behind the house. The steam curled from the mug like smoke from a chimney in winter. It smelled like hazelnut and silence. Madison came by late that afternoon. No knock. She had her own key now. I gave it to her without ceremony 2 weeks prior. She hadn't said thank you, just slipped it onto her keyring like it belonged there. She brought a Polaroid camera this time. I'm taking pictures for an art project, she said. Theme is what stays. I didn't ask what she meant. I just nodded. She snapped one of the garden, one of the porch, one of the empty guest room. Then she looked at me. Can I nodded again. The flash was soft. The photo spit out from the slot at the bottom and she shook it with an old-fashioned flair. You look good in this one, she said, squinting. I didn't ask to see it. I didn't need to. She slid it into the side pocket of her bag. We didn't talk about Michael. Not anymore. She never asked why he didn't call. I never asked if she missed him. Some silences we'd agreed were better left intact. But before she left, standing in the doorway, she said, I'm glad you stayed. After everything. You could have left. I looked at her, really looked, and said I did leave. Just not the way you think. She nodded as if that made perfect sense. When she drove away, I sat in the rocker again, listening to the wind push through the empty space where the lemon tree once stood. There was something soothing about its absence now. It had once been the proof of my sacrifice, the living monument to the family I thought I was anchoring. But now it was just space. Ready, waiting. I didn't need to fill it. I just needed to stop planting things for people who wouldn't water them, and maybe, just maybe, plant something that belonged to me. Only me. No one called on Christmas. Not Michael, not Claire. Not even his sister, who used to send the obligatory text with a stock photo of snowflakes and a half-hearted hope you're well attached. The silence was louder than any argument we'd never had. I made French toast that morning. Thick slices of sourdough soaked overnight, pan-fried in butter until the edges crisped. I dusted them with powdered sugar and sat at the kitchen table alone, the sun rising through the east window, turning the linoleum into something almost golden. It was peaceful. It was also devastating. You learn after a certain age how to hold both truths in your mouth At once joy and grief side by side like mismatched teeth. You stop trying to choose one. You just chew carefully. The night before, I'd hung up a single strand of white lights along the porch rail. Nothing else. No tree. No stockings, no carols playing from an old CD in the background. Just the lights blinking slowly like a heartbeat. Madison visited a few days later, cheeks red from the cold, smelling faintly of cinnamon and bus exhaust. She wore a scarf I'd knitted her when she was 5. I hadn't seen it in years. We sat on the couch and watched an old black and white movie neither of us really cared about. Halfway through, she leaned against me, head resting on my shoulder, quiet. "I heard Dad wanted to come," she said softly. I didn't turn my head. "Did he?" She shrugged. "Claire said it wasn't a good idea, that it might upset the balance you've built." I almost laughed. The balance I've built. As if silence were some fragile sculpture I might shatter by hearing his voice again. As if they hadn't already smashed everything, left the pieces in my lap, and asked me to thank them for the mess. "I'm not angry anymore," I said. And it was true. "I know," she said. "He still doesn't know what to do with that." She handed me a small box wrapped in brown craft paper and tied with twine. Inside was a framed photo, the Polaroid she'd taken weeks ago. Me in the garden hands and the dirt sleeves, pushed up expression unreadable. "You look like you," she said. I set it on the windowsill. New Year's passed quietly. I went to bed early. I didn't make resolutions. What I did do was start cataloging things in the attic. Not because I planned to purge, but because I needed to remember what was actually mine. There were old court case studies from the semester I'd almost finished. A letter from my mother written just weeks before she died, apologizing not with words, but with the way she signed it. "Always your mother, finally." There was a quilt I'd forgotten I made, each square stitched with tiny lines of poetry I used to write in the backs of notebooks while Michael was at soccer practice. Each item I touched felt like a thread I was pulling back through time. Not to undo, but to trace the shape of what had formed me. They'd tried to make me disappear, bit by bit, softly, politely. But here I was, alive, grounded, and more visible to myself than I had ever been. Sometime in mid-January, I received an envelope in the mail. Handwritten. No return address. I recognized the scrawl immediately Michael's. I held it for a day before opening it. Inside was a single sheet of notebook paper torn from a spiral, the edge ragged. "Mom, I know I don't deserve anything from you. Not words, not space, not even this moment. But I see, now you weren't holding me back. You were holding everything together. I don't know who I am outside of your sacrifice. I wish I'd found out without having to lose you first. I'm sorry. That's all. Michael." I folded the letter neatly and placed it in the back of my journal. Not at the front, not to revisit, but not to destroy either. Some truths don't need framing. They just need a place to rest. I didn't write back. Instead, I went out to the garden and pressed my bare fingers into the dirt. It was cold, stubborn, still sleeping, but underneath I knew the bulbs were waiting, that life was already beginning again, out of sight, without permission. Like me, it was a Thursday in February when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. I'd stopped expecting anyone. I was in the middle of organizing the spice rack, something small, repetitive, comforting. The sound of the bell cut through the stillness like a voice after a long silence. I opened the door slowly. It wasn't Michael. It was Claire. She looked different, smaller, not in body but in presence. Her coat hung stiff on her frame, a little too pristine, like it had been chosen to make her feel less fragile. Her makeup was done, but the effort showed. She didn't smile. I didn't either. Eleanor, she said, her voice level but thin. May I come in? I didn't answer right away. I just stepped aside. She moved cautiously into the foyer, glancing around like she expected the furniture to accuse her. Her eyes paused on the photographs, all changed now. Gone were the curated family portraits, the posed smiles. In their place were small, quiet memories, a lemon tree in bloom Madison holding a pie, the garden in the early light. She took a deep breath. I didn't come to rehash anything. I waited. I just wanted to say it out loud before time makes it irrelevant. I raised an eyebrow. She swallowed. I'm sorry, she said. Not just for what we did, but for what I was too proud to admit back then. Still, I waited. I was threatened by you, not because you were overbearing, but because you were present. You knew him. You loved him in ways I couldn't compete with. I could feel the years trembling between us like a rope pulled taut but never broken. You didn't have to compete, I said finally. That was your mistake. She blinked hard. I know. Her eyes moved to the dining room where a vase of dried rosemary sat in the center of the table. You made this house a home, she said quietly, and I tried to erase that, because it reminded me of what I hadn't built. I didn't soften. I didn't comfort her. But I didn't push her out either. Did Michael send you? No. Does he know you're here? She hesitated. No. That told me everything. Claire wasn't here for me. She was here for herself, for her own absolution, her own quiet reckoning. But that didn't make it empty. It made it honest. I walked to the writing desk in the corner and pulled open the drawer, took out the letter Michael had written, held it in my hands. Claire watched. I read it. I said. And I didn't answer. Not because I can't, but because I don't owe him that anymore. She nodded. I understand. Do you? She closed her eyes. Just for a second. No, she whispered. But I'm trying. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then I said, You can sit if you like. She did. We didn't talk more. Not about the will. Not about Madison. Not about the day she sent me away with a private driver and an envelope that felt like eviction dressed as grace. We just sat. Eventually she stood. I don't expect anything from this, she said. I just needed to be able to say that I was wrong. I nodded. She turned toward the door. Before she opened it, I said, Next time, knock. She froze, her back to me. I could see her shoulders rise the way her breath caught. Then she left. The door clicked shut behind her. Later that night, I stood in the doorway of the guest room, still empty, still waiting. I didn't fill it. Didn't need to. Not yet. Some rooms, like some wounds, are best left open for air. I took a bath that night, lavender salt, soft light, no sound but the water shifting against porcelain. My body was softer, now older. There were lines along my thighs I hadn't noticed before. A small scar near my collarbone I'd forgotten the reason for. I touched each place like a question. Who was I now? Not wife. Not mother in the way I'd been. Not exile. Not matriarch. Just a woman. Still alive, still changing. The garden would bloom soon. The bulbs I'd planted in the dark beneath the frost were waiting for the right moment to push through. So was I. Spring came slowly. It didn't arrive like it did in my childhood with the sudden burst of crocuses on the roadside and the scent of lilac everywhere. It came in hesitations, in pauses, in the way the sun began to linger just a little longer against the shutters in the early evening, as though it too wasn't quite ready to go. I spent most mornings in the chair by the window now, the one I moved from the living room into my bedroom. It faced the garden, the space I had started to call mine, though never out loud. Some claims are better kept quiet. They bloom better that way. The tulips came up first, bright little flames, red and gold, and one soft white that I hadn't remembered planting. I watched it open over days, wide and unapologetic. It rained for 3 days straight at the start of April. Soft, persistent rain, the kind that seeps into everything and coaxes green from brown. I liked the sound of it tapping the roof, a rhythm I could lean against. One morning I found a letter on the porch. Handwritten, but not Michael's, not Claire's either. It was from Madison. No envelope this time. Just a folded note held down with a small stone. Grandma, I know you're not big on words anymore. Or maybe you never were, and I just didn't see it until now. But I wanted you to know that when I sit with you, when we dig in the dirt, when we don't say much of anything at all, I hear everything you're not saying. I hear strength. I hear sadness too, but not the kind that keeps a person stuck. I think I understand now why you stopped asking for things. You stopped asking because you started taking back what was already yours. I want to grow up to be that brave. I don't think I ever told you but the lemon tree. You were the only one who ever picked the fruit. Everyone else just liked the idea of it being there. I think that says everything. I folded the letter and placed it in the book I kept by the bed. Not to preserve it, but so I could forget it there and stumble across it again one day. A reminder of how things can reach you even when you stop looking. That afternoon I brewed 2 cups of tea and set them on the porch. One for me, one for memory. It wasn't about ghosts. I don't believe in those. It was about making space for what once mattered and what didn't anymore. A few hours later, I opened the closet in the hallway, the one that had always been filled with things not quite useful, wrapping paper rolls, extra buttons, winter coats that no one wore. I cleared it out, not to throw it all away, but to empty it, to make space. For what I didn't know, and that was the point. I wasn't filling my life with people anymore just to prove I was still in it. I wasn't waiting for Michael to show up with a bouquet and a stammered apology. I wasn't rehearsing monologues for Claire. I wasn't imagining reconciliation, not because I couldn't forgive, but because I'd stopped placing my peace inside other people's pockets. I didn't need closure. I needed stillness. And that chair by the window gave it to me. That square of sunlight on the floor. The sound of the soil shifting in the garden. The breath between letters in the notes Madison left me now and then. I started a new habit. Every Sunday morning I would write a single sentence in a notebook I didn't plan to share. Just one. Never more. You are not gone. You are becoming. The quiet is not punishment. It is proof. There is no shame in being forgotten if you remember yourself. And once, they will never know what they lost. But I do. I wrote that one in the middle of a rainstorm when the windows fogged and the earth outside smelled like ash and rebirth. Sometimes grief shows up not as pain, but as precision. You begin to see things exactly as they were, not worse, not better. And that's when it hits you. That's when you start to really heal. When you stop needing the story to change. You just need it to end. Or rather, to become something else. That spring, I bought a set of garden chairs and placed them in the far corner of the yard, facing the direction the wind always seemed to come from. I never told anyone why. I didn't need to. The deed arrived by mail even though I already knew it was mine. Heavy cream envelope, thick paper, embossed seal in the corner. My full name typed in bold at the top, Eleanor Marie Thompson. It felt strange seeing it like that. Formal. Whole. No mom. No mother-in-law. No miss or ma'am. Just me. I didn't frame it. I didn't even put it in a drawer. I folded it gently and slid it into the back of the notebook where I'd been writing those Sunday sentences, the ones I never showed anyone, the ones that felt more like prayers than thoughts. That day I baked a peach cobbler, not for anyone, just because the peaches had looked so ripe at the corner market, and because something in me needed to do something ordinary with care. I played music while it baked Billie Holiday, Nina Simone. The women whose voices sounded like they'd survived whole lifetimes inside a single verse. When the oven timer rang, I didn't rush. I stood by the window and looked out at the garden. The rosemary had started to bloom, tiny blue blossoms shy and tucked close to the stem. I hadn't known they flowered like that. I'd planted them for their sturdiness, their scent, but there they were. Soft where I thought they'd only be strong. It reminded me of myself. That afternoon, I sat on the porch in my navy coat, the same one I wore the day I walked into Thanksgiving, and ended it and sipped coffee from a chipped mug. I didn't expect visitors, and none came. But around 4, a little breeze kicked up and one of the porch chairs beside me creaked gently as if someone had just sat down. I didn't turn to look. Some presences don't need confirmation. They just stay. A neighbor passed by with her dog and I lifted my hand in a small wave. She waved back. We'd never spoken more than 10 words, but she smiled like she recognized something in me. Maybe we don't always need to be understood in full. Maybe recognition is enough. That night as I stood at the bathroom mirror brushing my hair slower now with both hands, no longer favoring the right, I noticed the soft silver near my temples. How the lines around my mouth had softened, not deepened. Grief had not hardened me. It had emptied the room, and what I placed back inside my garden, my words, my Sunday morning chair was mine alone. I didn't win. No one clapped. No one said, "Look what she survived." But I did survive. And that is the last thing I claimed. Not the estate, not the house, not even my name. I claimed the quiet, and I made it home. Some treasures had been recovered. Others more valuable still had been discovered for the first time. It wasn't the ending I'd expected. It was better, harder, clearer, more honest. It was mine. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.